Weren't there supposed to be popsicles?
Yeah.
I saw something on Facebook.
Oh, yeah. Where?
I don't know.
Must be the parking lot.
The parking lot?
Popsicles?
We'll get one. Make sure it's hard.
Last car on the road. Oh, yeah. Popsicles? You guys have popsicles?
We do, yeah.
Alright, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
The ones at the bottom are coldest?
Popsicle.
Alright, cool, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Popsicle ride. Popsicles.
Wow, this fucking wind, man. Last night it was perfectly still. Damn.
Oh, there's wind? I didn't notice any.
Some big rain clouds. You gotta be a dick.
Us guys that are like close to 200 pounds, we don't notice wind.
Oh, it's just the heat, dude. That's what brings the dick
Revolutions. Remember? Yeah. That looks hard to get on, you know?
No, man. It makes it so easy for him.
I don't know. That looks hard.
Welcome back to another edition of Pop A, aka the Popsicle Ride, starting in Richardson, Texas. So I actually got a popsicle today. That was the footage at the very beginning. And it used to be that riders would get popsicles every time they did this ride, with the original rider who started this ride who provided the popsicles. Eventually the ride got too big and he stopped providing popsicles, and this was probably some 15 years ago that this stopped. So it was kind of cool to harken back to the tradition. Thank you to the person and persons who provided popsicles for the riders at the end of this ride. So what we're looking at here is a reduced group, and you can see that if you've followed my videos over time, you'll note that I usually start the video way before here. However, I was dropped from the group due to a red light, meaning I was at the very back of the group. It was a long green light. The front of the group went through green, but by the time it got to me, it had been red for quite a bit, and I did not feel comfortable rolling through a red light like that. So about 7 of us were dropped off the back as a result of the red light. So we ended up taking a shortcut, and I waited for the regular riders here on Allen Heights, and it took a long time for them to come. So immediately I began to think as I waited, this is not normal, it's taking them a long time. Maybe there was a mechanical. However, they typically don't stop for people's mechanicals, or there was an accident, a crash. As it turned out, there was a crash, and I'm just grateful that I wasn't involved myself, and I'm grateful that the person who did crash wasn't hurt. So it's pretty unusual for us to have crashes on this ride, but it seems like this is the second one in a month. In the summertime, the ride gets bigger. We have people that don't normally do the ride. They may not know where the potholes and the cracks are, or it's just a little more unpredictable. You know, everything that can happen when a ride gets big can happen in the case of the pop ride. So really, safety needs to come first, always. And there are things you can do to ensure your safety, safe practices. So for example, number 1, always protect your front wheel. Your front wheel is sacred. It's the thing that keeps you on the road. It's the thing that keeps you from being upside down. If you strike somebody's wheel in front of you, there's a good chance that you're going to go down. Your wheel will suddenly turn and flip, and you'll go down. So don't ride too close. Don't overlap wheels. I see people doing this all the time. Don't overlap your wheel with the rider in front of you, because if there's movement, their back wheel will strike your front wheel, and you will be the person to go down, and they'll feel a little vibration. Go, huh, what happened? Well, the thing that happened is you went down. It was your own fault because you didn't protect your front wheel. Now, I'm not making any comment about what happened on the crash today because I wasn't there and I didn't see it, and there's no video of it that I know of. So, but that's number 1. You got to protect your front wheel. Always be looking ahead. Don't just stare at the wheel right in front of you. So anticipate when the group is going to slow down or speed up. That way it doesn't catch you out. Also, you can see obstacles in the road that aren't called out. Cracks, potholes, big rocks sitting in the middle of the road, a piece of somebody's car, and so forth. It's not always called out. Sometimes riders' brains aren't working or whatever. There's a million reasons why something might not be called out, especially if you're in the back. This game of, pass the message along down the line is not going to happen with 40 riders all the time, especially if we're going fast. Give yourself an escape route. Think of ways in which you could escape if something happened. So where there isn't an escape route is right in the middle where you're surrounded by everyone else and you can't move. So if you're in an overlap position, get out of the overlap position as soon as you can and just be really aware of movement all around you. Give yourself a little breathing space. Anyway, there's a lot of practices you can do to keep safe and keep everyone else safe. Safety is the priority on these rides. Nobody wants to go down, so we'll work on making sure that everyone's safe. Also, take care of your bike. Take care of your drivetrain. Make sure your chain's not too old. Make sure your chain's not going to slip off. Make sure your cleat's not broken on your shoe. All these things that can happen in terms of mechanicals that cause crashes. That's happened on this ride. So, we're a reduced group. Usually you'd see a lot of my teammates in the group, but there's only one teammate in the group this time. Shout out to Joe. Where is he? I think he's right behind me, or where is he? Anyway, he's in our old kit, the orange kit, the orange, black, and yellow kit. And he raced today in the Tuesday night crit in the C race, and he joined in on the pop ride right after his crit. So that's pretty convenient for him that he can join a pop ride right after he does his crit. And it's pretty windy right here on Parker Road, the place I affectionately refer to as the gutter exam. This is where we get those really strong crosswinds as we head east. The wind is blowing from the right side of the screen to the left. So I'm spending a lot of time here kind of, not in the gutter per se, but purposefully being over to the right a little bit to give some shelter to the riders behind me. So I could be trying to move to the very far left, but I'm kind of moving up here. There's second echelon forming, and if we have a couple of echelons in here, there'll be more room for people to not be in the gutter in these really strong crosswinds. It was strong today, but wasn't as strong as some of the more recent rides in the past week where it was like 18 miles an hour. It wasn't quite that strong today. So going back to the beginning part of the video, I thought it was kind of funny. One of the riders was talking about how strong the wind was, and I kind of made a crack like I didn't notice the wind. Of course I noticed the wind, but he's basically saying, why do you have to say jerky stuff or whatever, and kind of made me think a little bit about the nature of personalities in cycling. So, harkening back to the old days when I first started on a road bike as an adult. So this would have been about, for me, 2002, when I lived near White Rock Lake. So I got myself a road bike, steel cage-ass road bike, and started doing laps at White Rock Lake. Then I found out there was a group ride that would go out on what was an abbreviated version of what we call the South Ride on Wednesday nights. These days there is still a Wednesday night South Ride, abbreviated South Ride, but it's a little bit more of a recovery ride. It was a bit more of a hammerfest back in the day from what I can recall. And, it seems like, you have your sort of hierarchy. When you're a recreational rider, at least this is my perspective, you know that there are guys that are a lot faster than you. There are guys on race teams. They wear their team kit. You as a recreational rider don't have a team kit. You just wear whatever crap you bought at the store, whatever, and they're the fast guys, the strong guys, and it's easy to determine over time who these people are. And I remember one time I did the ride, and I was feeling pretty good about the ride. I might have joined the recreational/race club at that time, Mirage, that I used to be on. It was the dominant club at that time in that part of Dallas. And I didn't even have a bib. I just bought the jersey. I paid my $25 to be in the club or whatever. And I remember I was at the end of one of these rides on Wednesday night, and I may have mentioned this in a video before, I don't know. But anyway, I was riding, this is the slow bit up St. Francis, you're going back to the lake. People are, it's just a recovery slow pace as you're going back. And this guy he was on the Mirage team, and he just kind of said some snippy things to me, like it really sucked to have to be on your wheel the whole ride with your like erratic movement. That wasn't exactly what he said, but it was maybe not quite as polite as that. And I was kind of taken aback. You feel like, oh, I had a good ride. I didn't get dropped. I put in a little bit of work or whatever, and I'm riding with some of the faster guys. And then one of these faster guys just kind of unleashes on you out of the blue, and you didn't really think you did anything wrong. You're not aware of you being a sketchy rider, and now you're getting this blowback. And I didn't know what to say. I think I just said, well, sorry. And one of the other riders on the team, Mirage, who was a racer and more senior, more, I guess we shall say, respected in the club. I think he got next to me and he said, "Don't listen to that guy. If he was doing it right and he had a problem, he would tell you how to do it better, and don't listen to him." Anyway, I felt a little bit better. That was a nice moment where a senior, writer that has experience and some skins on the wall gave some mentoring to a recreational rider that's just trying to get better and be safe and be faster. But anyway, I kind of had the impression over time, at that time, that fast riders are dicks. Not all of them, but if you're going to find dicks in cycling, they are among the racers and these guys that take it really seriously, that wear their team kit, that go over to White Rock Lake on the west side and do their intervals or whatever. And when I returned to cycling years later, because I took a major break from cycling, from just being recreational, tooling around cyclists, to then just restarting cycling and being the same thing, recreational cyclist, just going out to get fit. And but anyway, as time progressed, I started to get a little faster, a little fitter, and then eventually started doing faster group rides, and then considered racing. Anyway, through that process, I was like, I don't really know didn't really meet any of these so-called dicks that I thought might be more prevalent. In fact, almost everybody was really nice, and there's camaraderie and a good feeling of community, friendship, and mentorship in road cycling. And that's been my experience. I think that's probably most people's experience in the area. If it's not, we need to do a little better and try to make sure that that's the experience, at least in my opinion. So anyway, with regard to the there's no wind, I was just joking around, and I guess if I'm being a dick, I want to know it, because I don't really want to be a dick. But then again, dicks don't know that they're dicks, maybe, and maybe I'm the guy who's a dick who doesn't really know he's a dick. I don't know. I don't really like saying the word dick. I think it's a little bit uncouth, especially in my videos, but it's the appropriate word for the phenomenon we are discussing. So, if I'm a dick, please let me know. I want to know so I can be better. And if I'm rude to a cyclist that needs mentorship, I hope that's not the case. I hope I am mentoring, supporting, and teaching. And anyway, so that's that subject. What else were we going to talk about on this ride here? So I had some other topic in mind. Um, yeah. Oh, yeah. I was just thinking recently about, the cycling scene and somewhat the ephemeral nature of how things change over time. One of the riders on this ride on my team, Eric, he's been in the cycling scene a long time, many, many years in this area. And he was reflecting, looking back at old videos from 3 years ago about how things are different, the bikes are different, the kits are different, the people look different. I've looked at old videos that predated when I was riding, say, some of the crits from like 5 years ago. And again, the bikes look different, and I don't recognize a lot of the people in the races. Like, they're not the same people. And things change. Things go away. Lives change. There is turnover. And there's a little bit more turnover maybe than some of us think about, especially in racing, I think, because racing is something that people kind of may come into, do it for a little while, then stop. One local racer commented to me that probably the average racer who enters racing doesn't do it beyond 1 year. I don't know if that's really the case or not, but I think a lot of people may dabble in it, kind of get the experience that they wanted, or learn the thing that they wanted, and it's the rare person that tends to stick to it over a pretty long period, like 6 years, 7 years, 10 years, 15 years, and so forth. So, but isn't that a little bit like life in general? We bloom like a flower, but then the flower fades and dies and goes away. In other words, we shine while the sun shines. When the sun goes down, we go to sleep, so to speak. I don't want to be super depressing about it, but that's just the nature of life. We seize the opportunity when we have it, and we experience losses, and eventually we are lost as well. And I'm not here to give you the answers to life or the meaning of life. I kind of do cycling so I don't have to think so much. I have to think a lot in my job and my work that sometimes is stressful and emotionally taxing, and cycling is an outlet for me. One thing I like about cycling is that people in cycling don't talk about much more than cycling. In other words, it's a place where everyone kind of has a common bond and something in common. That is the cycling that we do. Now, that's not to say I like to talk about cycling all the time. And isn't this ironic? I'm talking about cycling when I'm not cycling. Watch a video of me cycling, saying that I don't always like to talk about cycling. Maybe I do always like to talk about cycling. Maybe I'm lying. Yeah, it's kind of funny here. We have this red light, green light, jump on it, red light again. So anyway, um, but yeah, we gotta appreciate these moments while they're here. What would it be like, for example, to change jobs and move away and go to a different cycling scene? I kind of wonder about that sometimes with Strava. You see some of these guys, like, you don't know they moved until you realize that the last long period of time are rides that are not local, and you're like, oh, I thought they were on vacation, but it looks like this is an awfully long vacation, and they're in some other part of the country, and you know, the bond that you had, if you had a bond, you know, let's be realistic. We don't have a bond with a lot of the people perhaps on Strava that follow us or we follow, but they come and go. So, and so this is where, let's be safe. Let's have a good time. Um, let's move on to a different topic. So I was reading a topic online about group rides, and the discussion was related to how to make group rides more interesting, and are there games or some kind of thing you can do on a group ride that's different than just riding. So, for example, one of the suggestions was you have a pace line, and the person on the very back of the pace line has to sprint to the front of the pace line. And maybe the person who's already on the front has to catch that wheel, and the group comes back together, and then you repeat, the person on the very back sprints off the front. Of course, that is a super organized kind of thing. It's not going to happen on a ride like this, especially with this many people. But some other person commented on the dynamics of a group ride. And what that person said was essentially a group ride's purpose is to determine who is the alpha male. Now I thought about that for a minute. Is that how these group rides that I participate in actually work? And yes, I think that's the way they actually work. So are we reduced to our caveman tendencies to just go out, club each other, and determine who is the alpha in the group? Now, what is it that people do that would go under this category? So, getting to the very front and just pulling really hard and accelerating the group, making everyone suffer, but they're not dropped. That's one way. Just riding to the front, really, going off the front and attacking and riding away from the group, just saying, hey, I'm faster than everybody else. You can't, not only can you not be on my wheel, you can't catch up to me, and I can just keep riding away. Or, these sprint zones or whatever it is that a person can do to demonstrate one's power, prowess, technique, speed, fitness. And there comes to be like this dynamic of who are the fast guys and who are not as fast, the second tier. You've got and then at the very back, the quote unquote serfs who are literally surfing the group in the back. Now, is that such a bad thing? I don't know. I don't think it's a terrible thing. But, it seems kind of a silly thing to have that be one's primary motive in cycling. When you think about it, what are other people's motives? So some people are training for racing for some particular event. Their goal is to prove their alpha status in a race, win the race, be the fastest person to the finish line in the race. Other people are out for physical fitness. Other people are out for stress relief. Other people are out to lose weight. Other people just like being outdoors and so forth. But of course, in the faster groups, a lot of those people that have these other motivations are not particularly inclined to enjoy really doing a hammerfest type ride. And a hammerfest ride is where you go as hard as you can, or other people are going as hard as they can, as fast as they can for much of the ride. And there is no particular instruction or expectation that there will be a smooth type pace to the ride. It may accelerate at times. It may be very difficult at times where everyone's at their limit. So anything that tries to take away from that alpha type scenario is often doomed. And how many times have we seen that happen with the group ride, where people will say, these are the rules of the group ride, and you do not, attack off the front, or you don't do whatever. And of course, there's going to be a couple of people that do that, and then the two that can't resist countering the two people that did it, and so forth, and suddenly everything's blown up. They also talk about team training camps where, oh, we're going to go out and do some base miles, and we're going to talk to each other, and we're going to learn each other's strengths and weaknesses and blah, 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 and get together and enjoy ourselves before the race season starts. Well, a lot of people say these team camps are nothing more than establishing who's the alpha and so forth. And to some degree, that might be actually quite useful if your racing strategy and your team strategy is to maximize your results by choosing to race for someone who is the strongest at a particular discipline. So, for example, you have the strongest sprinter, the strongest and smartest sprinter, because sprinting's not just about how much power you can put out, it's also about being in the right spot and a million other things. But who's the best breakaway artist, and who's got that highest ability to go fast for a long time? All these things could be useful to determine, but we don't usually think about it that way in terms of who is the alpha. From my perspective, when I'm doing one of these rides and someone new shows up who I know is very fast from other rides or due to the races that they've done and so forth, that's a fun thing to, like, okay, we get to see how this person does and match our legs a little bit and so forth. So that can be a lot of fun to have new people in the mix. A couple of guys off the front here, Clint and Mike, they've gone off the front and doing a little chasing effort, although usually we hit this light red up here, and foreshadowing, we do hit the light red. But a little nice effort up here to get the heart beating a little bit. And just a reduced group here. I think sometimes it's more fun to ride with a smaller group. You have a little bit more effort to do work. And alternatively, that means you may have less effort to sit in if you need to sit in. But having a group of 5 or 6 guys where there's a constant rotation, if you need that kind of workout, on a particular ride. I think it's a fun thing to do, and it's a good workout, sort of like being in a breakaway. And my last video of the wattage ride was exactly that. 5 guys in a breakaway, 4 guys doing work in the breakaway, and it's a different kind of ride. But why can't we, I kind of wish I had a better sense of humor. I could be cracking jokes the whole time and they'd be funny, and someone on the other end of this is laughing. But we all have to live with ourselves. Some of us aren't as funny as others, and I'm just not as funny as some others. So, uh, I and it's a little bit hard to sometimes talk for 30 minutes over a group ride, and like I said in my last video, I'm kind of ashamed that I do that. Or theoretically, I don't think there should be enough to talk about in a group ride, and there probably isn't. Look at these clouds. What a beautiful evening. Sometimes I've noticed that when you do sort of a really fast ride, and you may have been on that ride many times doing the same route, but then you get dropped or something happens and you're just riding by yourself and you're not going hard, and you're like, oh, look at this. There's a creek here and it's kind of pretty, or look at this feature of this house or something. You just notice things that absolutely were not noticed in your prior rides, because you're putting out some efforts, 700 watts up a hill. You're not thinking about, oh, there's a fence there and there's a cow and things like that. So you kind of don't get to smell the flowers so much. This gets to also the idea of like, oh, I'm going to have some Zen experience on my bike. Well, Zen experiences aren't, in my mind, typically associated with uh, microsecond calculations about how not to crash and die on a ride, and maintaining your space and traffic and the wheels in front of you and obstacles. It becomes second nature, and it's just part of the normal calculus. But you've got to have full attention on these rides and not be drifting into space. You need to have full command of your bike, your body, and really pay close attention to what you're doing, but not like it's a stressful thing per se. And I found that with more experience and time, the thing that could have been stressful to you before and anxiety provoking can actually become a lot better and easier. So the first time I did the Pape ride, it was a lot of anxiety and stress. I'd never been in that chaotic of an environment, or what seemed to me to be a chaotic environment. Over time, you realize there's actually a method to the madness, and there are rules that are going on. There are people that know what they're doing. There's space that's being maintained, but it's not the same thing as being on a slower B-type ride where there are strict things like, we're going to be in a single file pace line, or we're going to be in a double line, and nobody changes positions, and every 5 minutes someone rolls off the front and goes to the back. It's not quite like that. And that's a little bit how it is in a race. People are maintaining position based on aerodynamic advantage, and also just sort of the rules of the road, like, don't suddenly move, don't suddenly cross across the lane, because even if someone's maintaining proper space, they may be trying to pass or falling back, and you may clip wheels. Don't make sudden movements. That goes back to the thing about not crashing. And acting in a predictable manner so that people around you can have certain expectations of what you will do and what you won't do. I think that covers the major topics that came to mind before this ride. Riding safe. Don't be a dick. Don't be like me. And why we ride, having a good time on the ride, focusing on the ride. Another thing I was thinking about is, like, if you have the power, if say you're the strongest, you're the alpha, so to speak, or one of the alphas if the ride works that way, should you attack the group and ride off the front? Or should you just stay at the front and drill it, but not let gaps open up? There was a rider named Paul that is a Cat 1 and used to do this ride from time to time. It's been quite a while now since he's done the ride. But every time he would do the ride, he didn't just ride away from us. He could easily have rode away from us. he would get on the front and just freaking hammer, and it was all out to stay on his wheel to not let a gap open. And it made for some very difficult fast rides, and we still talk about those rides some 18 months later or 2 years later. uh, I don't think he was doing it for ego or anything. He wasn't trying to prove that he was the fast guy on the ride. He was the only Cat 1 on the ride. He was definitively the fastest guy on the ride. He was definitively the alpha. But his preferred way of doing the ride was to do strong efforts on the front. That in general did not gap the ride. No, I'm not saying anyone that gaps the ride and rides away is wrong. I think that can be fun too. Having people work together to chase someone off the front, going off the front and seeing how long you can stay off the front for a particular effort. And can you, if you're caught, when you're caught, still have the stamina and strength to get back on the group, accelerate as they are passing you. That can be actually good practice because you may encounter that in a real race. And that ability to have the confidence to initiate a breakaway and also do it again later and not feel like every time you've followed a break or initiated a break, that's it for your race. If it doesn't make it, if it fails, you can actually recover back in the group. That's something you can actually practice in a group ride. So there are different ways of going about this and handling this. So we're on Renner Road, of course. We're getting close to the end of the ride. We'll be approaching City Line. A little bit of a false flat here, so a little bit of an uphill, just 1% or less on this. And as we descend towards City Line with Whole Foods, might I add, sponsor of Pack Racing. That's also the State Farm headquarters that are right next to there. Um, Oftentimes people would put in a little sprint, so kind of a weird finish for this ride where you have two sprints right after each other, one right after each other, the final sprint being before the grocery store, Tom Thumb. And it's also because some people end their rides before we cross Interstate 75 and go towards the grocery store depending on where they live, like many group rides. This ride picks up riders from all over the area that drop in as the ride is on its way at various parts and then fall off as they return to their homes in the evening to settle in after a hard ride, get their recovery drink if they, whatever, glass of chocolate milk, eat their dinner, whatever it is that people do. Now, sometimes I've noticed that after a particularly hard ride, so I did 100 miles on Saturday, I was kind of taxed after that. I wasn't hungry at all, but I also know that if I don't eat, I'm just catabolizing my muscle. My body will be breaking down to pay that caloric debt. Not that I don't have a bit of fat to come off uh, in such an effort, but you really do need to eat to recover. And recently, a writer here, Scott, posted up an article about how there may be a relationship between poor nutrition after riding and osteoporosis. So we have to be aware of that possibility. Another thing I was thinking about for this channel, not that I have any high ambitions for this channel, but I wonder if there'd be interest in discussion about like the science behind training. Not that I'm an expert in the science behind training, but I do have a fair amount of medical training myself. I do have some experience publishing scientific articles with some cardiovascular bent to it. However, I don't consider myself to be an expert, but I think I'm much more astute than the average person in terms of reading literature and interpreting literature and understanding how studies are done, understanding statistics and so forth. On the other hand, I could see that being excruciatingly boring. Do people really want to go over have like a study session related to reading this literature? Probably not. I think at the end of the day, we want somebody else to do the work and interpret it and then tell us what to do and say, this kind of interval is good, or, putting in this kind of work, this kind of stress, these kinds of workouts and so forth. It's probably what we want. Why people have coaches, so that the coach can think about those things. And the coaches will have their own particular philosophy related to that. I think there's also danger in, over interpreting literature. Like you read a study and you think that's God's truth, and really there's more context and background to it that you should potentially take it with a grain of salt because of a number of things. As we know, not every study is replicated, not every study is correct. I was just reading an article recently related to psychiatry and the study of the genetics of depression. And what this article said was, as we understand genetics better, depression, the genetics, the study of genetics related to depression has not become clearer, it's become foggier. In other words, there was the initial thought that perhaps there would be a few genes or several genes that would be really important to predict depression or predict how people could be treated or respond to treatments for depression. But it's turned out to be a real mess in that there aren't these predictive type genes. However, at the very beginning of the understanding of genetics and depression, there was a particular gene that people suspected might be involved because of its relationship to the neurotransmitter serotonin. And lots of people did studies on this particular gene and came up with all kinds of results. And there's something like 1,000 studies on this particular gene. And as it turns out, in 2019, we think most of those studies have no bearing on reality. In other words, they do not shed any useful light, it turns out, on the situation. So sometimes you can get a little bit too in the weeds, and what you need is a bigger picture. And you can't get overly focused on things. What does this have to do with cycling? I have no idea. But my point is, people will get fixed on the idea of the moment, the trendy thing, and sometimes it's back to basics, common sense, that may be the more important thing in cycling. So, for example, this debate about whether to do sweet spot training or not. Sweet spot where you're below threshold. The idea is that you can do work that's taxing, but you don't have to do a ton of it. So someone that's on a restricted amount of time that they can do workouts, there's the idea that you do sweet spot training and this will help your FTP. On the other hand, you have the sort of binary polarized training. So that idea is you don't go in the middle, you don't do sweet spot training, you either go really hard or you go really easy. And I've been experimenting with that a little bit this year. Getting away from sweet spot, although you can argue a ride like this, actually a group ride like this is sweet spot, but when I'm on my trainer, I've tended to stay away from doing as much sweet spot work, and I've been experimenting a little more with polarized training, meaning essentially that I am doing more riding that is easy, getting more volume that is easy and not hammering all the time. And I've become convinced that there is something to that. And the best thing I heard that made sense to me about that is manipulating your stress response. So the idea is that if you have too much of a stress response with your hormones, you'll actually be doing yourself harm in terms of recovering and getting stronger. So you've got to manage the hormonal response. What if you could work out your muscles, your machinery, but at the same time not start up that inflammatory stress hormone response that has a negative effect on recovery and getting stronger? That's the idea of polarized training. You do get that stress response when you go hard, but you need to go very hard. Of course, it's really hard to, at least for me, just stay on those kinds of schedules and that kind of training when I can go out and have a fun group ride. It's hard for me to say, yeah, I'm just going to sit on the trainer tonight instead of going out on a beautiful night. I'm not training for the Olympics. I don't have any particular goal. I'm not trying to become an amateur masters national champion or anything like that. I'm just trying to have a good time, and this racing thing has been more about the experience of what is it like to race. And certainly there's something really fun about racing in terms of tactics and sort of the chess aspect in combination with your fitness that you've put a lot of work into, not just over the last few months, but over years. And there is a cumulative benefit you get from training that is over years. I think especially when you're older. You notice these juniors, some of these really talented junior kids, they can make impressive gains really quickly in a way that I think older people cannot. So here we have a little bit of a sprint going here. I think this is Clint chasing Mike, and a little bit of delay on my part to get some free space here. And having some fun here, just putting in some efforts. And I think Clint beat me to the line here. Of course, Mike is well ahead there. He can look at this video, hopefully, and note the yellow sign in the back that is the finish line. But, of course, maybe he wants to get a little more work in. Not suggesting that he didn't know where. I did suggest he didn't know where the finish line was. In fact, he did ask me, I think, right here, where exactly is the finish line. And I told him. But yeah, Mike is an excellent sprinter, and I know he does a lot of hard work, not just on group rides. He does a lot of work on the trainer, and gave me a couple of tips on things that he does. So his results have paid off for him big time with 2 state titles in 1 year in both his age and ability category. So that's all I've got for this particular group ride today. Popsicle ride, Pop A. Starting from Richardson, Texas, the premier, best group ride, Hammerfest, that starts in Richardson on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Can't beat that. So that's what we got. Stay fresh, stay alive, stay well, my friends. Bye-bye.